bombing the three Jimas. Yeah, Iwo, Chichi, and Haha. No, I'm not making it up. No, those are real places. Yes, including Haha. Well, it's not very funny for the people living there. Aha! Yeah, okay. Bye. June 17th, 1944. In the past year, the Allies have fought the Japanese and taken the islands of their outer defense perimeter. But this week, they finally hit the inner perimeter. This week, they attacked the Marianas. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, two big offensives got going. The Allies invaded Normandy from across the Channel, gaining a beachhead and landing men in the hundreds of thousands, and the Soviets launched a massive attack against the Finns. Allied attacks in Italy also continued, taking Rome, while the fighting in India at Impal and Kohima slowly approached its end. The Allies are launching yet another big operation this week. Well, the Americans are, hitting the Mariana Islands. A few things about this operation. This is something that U.S. Naval Chief Ernest King has long wanted to get going, to penetrate Japan's inner defense ring and seize Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. King understood, arguably better than any other Allied strategist, that the Central Pacific offered the most direct route to Japan. By the same token, King knew that control of the Marianas meant control of the Central Pacific. With the Marianas in hand, the Americans could sever Japanese lines of communication throughout much of the Pacific, presenting the enemy with a threat so profound as to provoke the decisive fleet engagement that had eluded Nimitz for 2 years, as the Imperial Navy, after the Midway debacle, had generally avoided major combat on the high seas, though Japanese naval leaders still planned and also yearned for just this sort of showdown. Victory in the Marianas would also mean naval bases like 2,400 kilometers from Tokyo, which is easily within range of the B-29 Superfortress, which is soon to be in full service. Actually, the first B-29 combat mission was last week on the 5th, raiding Bangkok. This week comes the first Allied raid on the Japanese home islands since the Doolittle raid over 2 years ago. 47 B-29s bombed the Imperial Iron and Steel Works at Yawata, but they do very little damage, and they also use up most of the fuel at Chengdu, where 68 of them took off. However, this is a preliminary test adventure, and there will be many more such raids soon to come. One of the B-29s is destroyed on the ground by Japanese fighters after making an emergency landing still in China, which is a further reason that Army Air Forces Chief Hap Arnold agrees with King that bases should be on the Marianas and not mainland China, which is partly occupied and very much under attack by the enemy at the moment. Operation Forager is the name of the mission to take these three islands nearly 6,000 kilometers from Pearl Harbor. To do this, Ray Spruance's 5th Fleet has some 600 ships, 8 of them fleet carriers, 7 light carriers, 7 battleships, and 20 cruisers. Task Force 17 adds 19 submarines to this armada, and of course, the Service Force Pacific Fleet has the tankers and storage ships and all that. Just for basic operations, the warships alone take 2,650,000 liters of fuel a week. 66,779 ground troops have been allocated to capture Saipan and Tinian. This is the Northern Troops and Landing Force, comprised of the 5th Amphibious Corps and attached units, the 5th Amphibious being the 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions and the 27th Infantry Division. 39,110 men are to take Guam. This is the Southern Troops and Landing Force, which is the 3rd Amphibious Corps plus attachments, that corps being comprised of the 3rd Marine Division, the 1st Provisional Marine Brigade, and the 27th and 77th Infantry Divisions. Holland Smith is in overall command, though he'll focus on the north, and Roy Geiger commands the southern force. They'll all arrive in 37 troop transports and 47 LSTs, landing ship tanks, with their big capacity. Considering the amount of such ships in service just now in Normandy and the English Channel, this is a pretty remarkable number and showcases U.S. production capacity. On Saipan, defending the headquarters of the Central Pacific Area Fleet at Garapan, the Imperial Japanese Navy has 6,000 or so men, and the Imperial Japanese Army another 25,000. As we know, there is tension between Army and Navy, and there is no overall commander here. senior leaders did agree on the prevailing Japanese doctrine of defending the waterline against amphibious invasions, a holdover from the fighting on small coral atoll islands, where it might actually have been possible to destroy the invaders in the water or on the beaches. But on the larger landmass islands in the western or central Pacific, bristling with caves, jungles, mountains, and valleys, and quite commonly expansive landing beaches as well, it made less sense. What was more, as long as the Americans enjoyed control of the air and sea, the chances of repelling them on the beaches remained minimal. A 6-kilometer stretch of beach on the southwestern coast is the obvious landing zone, so all the Japanese frontline troops are in fact at or near the beach, but they still do have an awful lot of machine guns and artillery. The aerial attacks begin at 1 p.m. on the 11th, as 225 planes take off from the carriers, strafing and bombing Saipan, Tinian, Guam, and Rota all afternoon. They do serious damage, either damaging or destroying 147 Japanese planes for 11 of their own, thus gaining local control of the air straight away. 2 more days of air raids further wipe out Japanese aerial capacity, and the invasion fleet closes in the 13th. Now secure, they're not going to lose a lot of ships to Japanese planes. Japanese fleets have sailed from Tawi-Tawi and Batian in response to this, though, and the former has been sighted and reported by American subs. Altogether, the coming Japanese have 5 fleet carriers, 2 light carriers, 2 seaplane carriers, 5 battleships, and assorted cruisers and destroyers. This is obviously totally outclassed by the American fleet. However, the plan for their operation, devised by the Commander-in-Chief Admiral Toyota, intends to cope with their inferiority by relying on the help of land-based aircraft from the Marianas and other nearby groups. Unfortunately, from the Japanese point of view, the recent and present operations of the American carriers have drastically reduced these land-based forces, but the local commanders have left their superiors in ignorance of this. That knowledge might come in handy to those ships possibly heading for a major battle at a major disadvantage. Well, on the 15th at 5:30 a.m., the American naval guns open up. They pound Saipan for 90 minutes, and then from 7 to 8 a.m. are airstrikes, then more naval bombardment. This all sabotages Japanese communications and logistics, but doesn't do as much actual damage as planned and hoped for. A lot of the Japanese gun emplacements are in bomb shelters. Still, there's some irony here. Chuichi Nagumo has now been relegated to commanding Saipan's tiny flotilla, and he is now being bombarded by 3 of the battleships his forces sank at Pearl Harbor in December 1941. Landings are made north and south of Etna Point. There's a lot of resistance, and the landings are further apart than intended. So, although the Marines do get ashore, they don't link up landing sites. They do link up the 16th, though. That morning, 20,000 Americans have landed on Saipan. However, landings that day are anything but smooth. Communications are terrible in general, and a lot of the landings take place after dark, with the beaches still under Japanese fire. Any semblance of organization disintegrated. Boats wandered for hours, trying to make their way to the reef, sometimes narrowly averting collisions or friendly fire incidents with other vessels. Unit cohesion and organization were either fragmentary or non-existent. Once ashore, and added to the embattled marine perimeter, the prospect of attempting to move inland in the darkness bordered on lunacy. Still, by mid-afternoon today, most of the 165th and 105th Infantry Regiments, division headquarters, and 3 artillery battalions are ashore on the right flank of the 4th Marine Division. On the 16th, the Guam invasion is postponed because of the imminent arrival of that Japanese fleet. Guam was supposed to be hit the 18th, but now it's indefinite. Also, on the 15th and 16th, 2 carrier groups under Jocko Clark attack Iwo Jima, Chichijima, and Hahajima. By today, they are heading to rendezvous west of the Marianas. Yesterday and today, the Japanese fleet is linking up and refueling and has been sighted twice more. So the Americans are fairly well aware of Japanese intentions. In China, Chiang Kai-shek and his nationalist army are by now aware of the Japanese intentions as well. We saw a couple weeks ago the Japanese marching south along the Shan River in China, heading towards Changsha. They arrived and besieged it with 30,000 men. Shui Yue, commanding the 9th War Zone, has only like 10,000 men available to defend it. Remember, he asked for more, but Chiang Kai-shek said he had to defend with only local forces. The Japanese plan is to take Mount Uelu west of the city. That is being held by Zhang Deneng and one understrength division of like 3,000 men. Seeing the Japanese arrive, he tries to move men up from the city, but he doesn't have enough ferries for the river, and the result is chaos and confusion. Changsha looks like it is soon to fall. Over in Normandy, one man's intentions are being thwarted by his boss. Rommel sought to focus his attacking forces against the American bridgehead in the Carentan-Montabourg area, a move which could prevent the cutting off of the German forces in the Cotentin Peninsula. Hitler, however, intervened to veto this plan and ordered Rommel to attack instead from Caen against the British beachhead. The British troops, however, were reinforced more quickly than Rommel's and were able to advance against him before his own attack was ready. So, the result is that already on the 11th, Carentan is taken by the American forces. They also take Lisson. The 12th, the U.S. 4th Division, hits German strongpoints at Montabourg, Kriesbeck, and near Azeville. The Germans only hold at Montabourg. Other 7th Corps troops are fighting across the Cotentin Peninsula and southwest from Carentan. 5th Corps is advancing on Saint-Loup, reaching Cerisy-la-Forêt and the Bayeux Saint-Loup Road. Miles Dempsey's general plan for the British against Caen, while Omar Bradley has the Americans advanced west across the Cotentin to the coast to isolate Cherbourg, is for British 1st Corps to attack from the bridgehead on the River Orne and encircle Caen from the east, while British 30th Corps attacks from Bayeux towards Villers-Bocage and comes round the west. And then, when the time is right, British 1st Airborne will land south of Caen to complete the encirclement. But these plans go awry right off. Though they fight off German assaults, 1st Corps has to cancel its southward attack, and 30th Corps launches its attack the 11th, but meets serious opposition from the 1st SS Panzer Corps. On the 13th, the 7th Armored Division advances to Villers-Bocage, but the German counterattack throws them back. That day, the 17th Panzers try to retake Carentan and are defeated with difficulty. U.S. forces do take Pont-l'Abbé. On the 14th, the U.S. 9th Corps is operational between 7th and 5th Corps. 8th Corps is operational from the 15th. On the 14th and 15th, first 325 Lancaster bombers make a night raid on Le Havre, sinking 35 ships, which is a big chunk of the remaining German Channel forces. Then, the next night, 300 Lancasters hit Boulogne, sinking 14 small warships. On the 16th, U.S. forces cross the Douve and take Saint-Sauveur-le-Vicomte. And today, the 17th, American forces reach the west coast of Cotentin, north and south of Barneville. Also today, Adolf Hitler meets with Erwin Rommel and Gerd von Rundstedt, his Normandy and his overall France commanders, at Soissons. The brass wants to withdraw to better defensive positions, but Hitler refuses and flies into a rage. He accuses the German army in France of cowardice and says the V-1 flying bombs will win the war. The German forces, now cut off in the north of Cotentin, are refused permission to break out. This is Hitler's first visit to France since he signed the armistice in 1940, actually. And while he has refused to release any forces from 15th Army east of the Seine, he has ordered the 9th and 10th SS Panzer Divisions of 2nd SS Panzer Corps over from the USSR to beef up Rommel's forces, though it will take them time to arrive. There are still some Allied gains going on in Italy as well. On the 14th, British 8th Army units take Orvieto, Terni, and Todi, and then Spoleto the 16th. But there is very serious fighting and serious Allied advances in Northern Europe, in Finland. The Soviet offensive against the Finns continues. Finnish 4th Corps is pushed back to their 2nd defense line by the 12th. Finnish commander Gustav Mannerheim pulls a division and a brigade from East Karelia over to the Isthmus of Karelia to help the defense. His staff does not think that will be enough, and on the 13th decides that if the second line falls, they'll pull back in East Karelia, giving up the Svir and Maaselka positions, and just holding a short line north of Lake Ladoga, which would free up 2 or 3 full divisions for the Isthmus. German commander in Finland, Eduard Dietl, says they should do this before it's too late, and not worry too much about giving up East Karelia. He thinks the Finns can hold off the Soviets on the shorter line, which would not only save their country, but save his 20th Mountain Army from having to execute Operation Berke, which is a worst-case scenario that involves him pulling his troops way back up to the north by the Swedish border in an east-west line to protect the German mining interests up there and maybe fall back to Norway. He will recommend to Hitler that they give any and all support to the Finns, which would also tie the Finns more closely to Germany politically. And remember I said a couple months ago that Hitler had embargoed food and weapons to the Finns, worried that they were going to leave the war? Yeah, well, Mannerheim asks OKW if they can please have them, and Hitler says okay on the 13th. Already the 14th, the Soviets are attacking the second line hard with artillery and armor, and by the 15th, they've broken a 13-kilometer hole near the coast. The main Soviet effort is along the railway line towards Viipuri, and it doesn't seem the Finns can stop them short of the city. But the big worry for the Finns is the Soviets reaching and closing the gap between the city and the Vuoksi River before 3rd and 4th Corps can pull back. Then they'd have to cross the river to the north, and it only has one bridge, which would pretty much mean abandoning all heavy equipment to get so many men across. Yesterday, the 16th, Mannerheim orders the withdrawal to the Viipuri-Vuoksi line, which, as I said last week, has good natural defenses, but they've only been building it for 6 months. The week ends with the Soviets in pursuit. It also ends with Mannerheim giving the order to give up East Karelia. OKW is against this, which you might think surprising, but giving up East Karelia means the Finns giving up their main actual war gain, which means their last bargaining chip with the Soviets, which means their reason for staying in the war. So OKW clearly has an issue with that. The Soviet offensive against the Finns is just a preliminary for their massive Operation Bagration, scheduled to go off in just a few days against German Army Group Center. As we've seen, though, the Soviets have run a brilliant deception campaign covering the whole thing. So the German High Command thinks the blow is coming against Army Group North Ukraine. We even saw that most of Center's armor was diverted to North Ukraine. But you can't really hide the movement of men in the literal millions forever, can you? It is true that the Germans have spotted quite a lot, actually. Evidence was increasing of a massive Russian buildup against Army Group Center, apparently deployed to smother 9th Army at Bobruisk, concentrated against 4th Army in the Mogilev and Orsha area, and again at Vitebsk to threaten 3rd Panzer. German intelligence was aware that divisions from the Crimea were moving up to the central sector, and that 5th Guards Tank Army was also on the move to this front. There was a massive Soviet air presence. 3rd Panzer was identifying crack Soviet divisions closing in on Vitebsk, a sure sign that something big was brewing. Yet, even at the OKH conference on the 14th of June, attended by all Army Group commanders, while Army Group Center could point to enormous Soviet reinforcements against it, none of this evidence was taken as conclusive. Enemy intention and enemy situation assessments conceded that a rapid buildup against Army Group Center was feasible, but the idea of a Russian attack in Galicia still held sway. None so blind as he who will not see. On the Soviet side, the kickoff date is pretty much determined by the railwaymen, and because of so much traffic, it is postponed a few days. So just by chance, it will begin exactly 3 years to the day after Operation Barbarossa, the Axis invasion of the USSR, on June 22nd, or at least a soft beginning. Basically, reconnaissance in force attacks, and aerial nighttime bombing attacks will also. As this week leads into next and the ground forces are nearly assembled, the 4 fronts that will execute the operation have 1,254,000 men. 1,670,000 if you count the left wing of 1st Belarusian Front, who aren't really to be committed. 2,715 tanks, 1,355 self-propelled guns, 24,000 big guns and mobile heavy mortars, and 2,306 Katyusha rocket launchers to support them, as do 5,327 planes. And atop this pyramid of men, tanks, guns, and aircraft stood Marshal Zhukov, waiting impatiently to lash Soviet armies forward on a savage attack on the one remaining bastion of German strength on the Eastern Front. And we'll see what happens when the lash comes down next week. Here are a couple of notes to end this one. On the 13th, Germany launches a V-1 flying bomb attack against England. Hitler thinks these super weapons will win the war. 10 are fired this day, of which 4 make it across the channel. 1 hits London, killing 6. Actually, this is not the only super weapon Hitler unleashes this week. On the 11th at Normandy, the Luftwaffe conducts its first mine laying of oyster mines. These are pressure mines, and they're set off by a ship going over them, thus suddenly increasing the water pressure on them. And how the heck do you stop that? Well, the answer for the moment is that you don't. Ships literally have to crawl at like 1 kilometer per hour off the coast to not cause the sudden pressure increase that sets off the mine, which is pretty inconvenient for those trying to grow a beachhead. But it seems like there are just too few of the mines to give the density needed to really stop the Allies in their tracks. So that is the week, with heavy fighting in an awful lot of places: the Marianas, Italy, Normandy, Finland, and a gigantic Soviet offensive just about to begin. And possibly a giant naval battle between the Japanese and the Americans. And with Japanese command counting on the presence of hundreds and hundreds of land-based planes to win such a battle. Land-based planes that it seems are not there, and Japanese high command is not aware of it. And 1 million Red Army soldiers just about to crash into Army Group Center, and German high command is not aware of it. Well, I don't know what's going to happen next week until next week, but it's my guess that someone somewhere is in for a rude awakening. I mentioned the Soviet intelligence and deception campaign. If you want to see more about the intelligence war, you can click here for a special we did about Enigma. Whew, that's good stuff. It'll come up in just a minute. And you can join the Time Ghost Army to get ever more content like this excellent stuff. These are the newest officers, and the Army Member of the Week is Jack Doyle. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.